Of you to the Commonwealth Medical College for this joint Schemel Forum, which is being co-hosted by the University of Scranton and the Commonwealth Medical College. And to get us launched, first of all, for those of you who are guests here and don't know us, I'm Dr. Steve Scheinman. I'm the President and Dean of the Commonwealth Medical College. And without further ado, I would like to invite Sandra Myers, whose title is too long to read, the Director of the Schemel Forum.
Thank you. Thank you. That wasn't too long, was it? Director of the Schemel Forum. Not bad, yeah. Okay. It's always a privilege, as well as a great pleasure, for the Schemel Forum to collaborate with the Commonwealth Medical College. The Schemel Forum, for those who don't know about it, is a continuing education program for enrichment at the University of Scranton. We are solidly based in the humanities and in current affairs, bringing into the community distinguished scholars and pundits who help us to understand the complexities of this world, and also we have the richness of the faculty of our own institution that helps a great deal on that matter. On a personal note, I'm one of those Scrantonians who believe that the Commonwealth Medical College is the best thing that's happened to Scranton and the region in my lifetime, and I'm very happy to always collaborate. And I'm particularly rewarded this time because our speaker, Dr. Greer, includes among his titles founding chair of the Department of the Humanities, Health and Society at his medical college. As one who has spent much of my adult life participating in and advocating for the humanities, I'm delighted that Dr. Greer, and I take it his institution, see the connection between the humanities and science. And now I'll turn the mic back over to Dr. Scheinman to do the real introduction.
Thank you, Sandra. So it is, first of all, this is the second time we have done a joint Schemel Forum, and I am happy to promise that we will do this annually. It's been a wonderful thing, and a wonderful partnership, not the only element of the partnership between us and the University of Scranton. And so I want to thank Sandra Myers and her entire staff, Emily Brees, who was sitting somewhere right here. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Pedro Greer, who asked me to offer the following disclaimer. He is from Miami, but he has never been convicted. He is a nationally recognized leader in community-focused medical education and an important voice of conscience, reminding us that the whole point of medicine is to serve people. Dr. Greer is a practicing gastroenterologist with a subspecialty in liver disease. He is a professor of medicine at the Herbert Wertheim College of Medicine at Florida International University in Miami, FIU, one of the other brand new medical schools created in the 21st century. At FIU, he is, as Sandra said, the founding chair of the Department of Humanities, Health and Society, which has now, alas, been renamed Medicine, Family Medicine, and Community Health, which is probably more descriptive but much more mundane. He's also Associate Dean for Community Engagement. These titles barely begin to capture the impact that Dr. Greer has had to create a remarkable curriculum at FIU that is a model of community engagement. At FIU, as at TCMC, the community is the classroom. His curriculum engages the students into the community in ways that are woven organically into the educational program and gives them a very palpable sense that illness is not simply a process of pathophysiology, but is very much a function of the social determinants. While most people view interprofessional education as something that goes on among health professionals, his community health teams include non-healthcare people as well. His students come to appreciate the many dimensions of interdependence. Dr. Greer's commitment to the underprivileged has been recognized at the very highest levels, and you'll see what I mean by that. He has received a MacArthur Genius Award. He's received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, America's highest civilian award. He's received the Presidential Service Award, and he has received 3 papal medals. He is a Knight of Malta and St. Gregory, and a trustee at the Rand Corporation. I don't know why I threw in that last one. It's after the Pope, what... He's been with us for 2 days, and we have learned a tremendous amount from Dr. Greer during that time. I'm really grateful to him for taking the time to be with us, and now happy to share him with you on the subject of lessons from our most vulnerable patients, why we should treat them without prejudice. Dr. Greer.
Thank you, Dean. I want everybody to know that my mother wrote the introduction. So, my name is Pedro Greer. I go by Joe Greer. I generally tell the story. I do that because I'm from the South and there's no redneck that can pronounce Pedro. So we try to make life easier for them. The truth was, my daughter refers to me as the very first anchor baby. My mother was visiting Miami in the mid-50s and I was born prematurely. We went right back to Cuba. And after the revolution in 1961, when we tried to come back in the country, our family was not a family of means, and as such, couldn't get into the United States until they found out that I was an American citizen. So I've got the designation from my daughter of the original anchor baby. I just used to refer to myself as a natural-born immigrant. I'd like to thank you all for inviting me here, and let me tell you how spectacular what you guys have going on in Scranton is. You have this Commonwealth Medical College, which is cutting edge, and I got to tell you, in the last 2 days, I have learned a lot more than I can ever teach here. The leadership you have here, the faculty you have here, and the direction you're going is the direction our country needs to go. And why do I say that? Well, we as an American nation rank 39th in the world in health outcomes, 39th. There is no pride in being 39th in the world. There is no pride in having 4 Caribbean nations ahead of you, not including Cuba. There is no pride in being not just the most expensive nation in healthcare delivery, but twice as expensive as number 2, which is Luxembourg. We are the leaders in the world in liver transplantations and heart transplantations and some of the great basic sciences. We fall to the bottom of the industrialized nations when it comes to survival, healthy living, and a quality of life. We as a medical profession, we as medical educators, have to look at ourselves and say, we got a lot to blame for that. We set the admissions criteria. We admitted them. We trained them. We educated them, and then we sent them out into the American workforce. Well, something has happened. When did it become socially acceptable in this country to refuse a patient because they had no money? When did that happen to our profession? How can we honestly say that's the right thing to do? A medical student applies to medical school and says they want to save the world. A week or 2 into their medical education, they have a white coat ceremony and they take an oath. About 2/3 of your education is paid for by the public dollar. When you learn how to do procedures, an abdominal paracentesis, a thoracentesis, a lumbar puncture, the first time you put in an IV, I can guarantee you it's not the CEO of an international company, but most probably an indigent patient in a hospital. When you graduate, you take another oath. Many medical schools, like you do here, create your own oath. What happened? The public helps pay for your education. The very poor become the patients that teach you how to become a physician. Then we graduate and we take an oath and we forget that we're no longer professionals. We're too involved in money. There's nothing wrong with money, coming from a background that had very little of it. But there's something wrong when you don't have value, when you don't have moral, and when you don't have ethics. And when we as a profession accept that. Why are the social determinants of health so important? Well, let me give you a little background history. Back in the 1800s, up until the last third of the 1800s, doctors didn't wear white coats. Doctors wore black coats. And it wasn't because it was a solemn event or we were like priests or rabbis. I think it was because we had no science. And basically, we were the last stop before death. And then you had Osler and Lister and the Fleckner report, which I have issues with. But Fleckner did teach us the importance of science. And then at that time, the great artists started showing pictures of doctors in white coats. because white meant purity. It meant something. And from there, in the last 120 years, our science has advanced miraculously. We have better science in this country than in any other country. But then something happened about 10 years ago with the white coat. We started seeing the white coat as a nice symbol, but my God, is it a petri dish. If you wear that everywhere, you're going to infect every single patient around here. By the way, they told us not to wear ties either. We should wear scrubs. Remember that, students. Okay, this is from ID. So now there's a new science we need to learn, the social sciences. And why is that important? Over 80% of all diseases, 80%, not 5%, not 10%, not 20%, not even half, 80% of all diseases in this country have a non-biologic cause. What do we do as entrepreneurs? Well, there's so many diabetics, let's develop diabetic centers. I can make a fortune. And you can. We did the same thing with dialysis and the amount of money that was made with dialysis. Is there something wrong with making money? Not at all, as long as professionals do it ethically and we do it for the right reasons. And the decisions we make are not motivated by our income, but by our values. But this is America, and we know in the last 50 years of health science research, doctors, like most people in this country, are motivated by the vending machine, by how they're going to make money. And that's why value-based healthcare becomes so important. 80% of diseases are caused by non-biologic causes. We call ourselves healthcare providers. We have healthcare systems. Let's be honest. We don't deliver healthcare. We deliver disease intervention. We wait till you're sick. Traditionally, in American medical schools and in medical schools around the country, around the world, although it has changed quite a bit in Europe in the last 40 years, we taught you how to identify a disease and how to treat it. Well, if we're going to continue to do that, then let's get it right on how we treat them. I'll give you a little background on myself. I'm Cuban Irish. I'm Cubish. That means I'm from one poor, small, corrupt Catholic island to another. My wife is Irish Catholic. After 30 years, I've earned the right to define the Irish Catholic. It's people whose impending sense of tragedy is what holds them together during brief moments of joy. I'm Cuban. That means the world is a conspiracy theory. And even though I'm half Irish and I know I will fail, I'm satisfied in knowing it's Fidel Castro's fault. So that balances out my life. I grew up in the 1960s and the 1970s and the last part of the 1950s, the last half. And what a wonderful time to grow up in this country as an immigrant family. What a horrible time to grow up as an immigrant family in the southern United States. It was not as bad as being an African slave that then had to stay and deal with the consequences of after the Civil War. I feel like many times when I describe the South where I come from, I start off by saying, I come from a country that's still recovering from a civil war. I grew up in a place where segregation was the norm. It wasn't until the late 1970s that if you were black, you were allowed on Miami Beach without a specific ID card. When I was in high school at an all-boys Catholic school, the Ku Klux Klan burned a cross at our school because we were the first to desegregate. Now, let me explain to you what it looks like as an immigrant kid seeing a burning cross at a Catholic school. If you want the hell scared out of you, look at that. And then when they explained to me what was going on and I told my parents, it's sort of difficult to explain to your parents with very strong Cuban accents what the Ku Klux Klan is when they can't even pronounce that. Ku Klux Klan? What is that? That's what I grew up in. I went the atypical way of a Cuban. I didn't play baseball, I played football. We won one game in high school, our senior year, homecoming game, and I caught the winning touchdown. Talk about the Forrest Gump of life. And at the Orange Bowl, by the way. And then I went to play at the University of Florida. The second year they had desegregated the Southeastern Conference. Can you even imagine going to a school that has segregated dorms? Can you imagine going to college where the clubs at night have white night and black night? Can you imagine going to a place in the South where the world is divided between whites and blacks and you're Cuban? And when they assigned rooms, they saw my name, Pedro Greer. Greer, he's got to be black, because that's a Southern black name. And Pedro, what kind of white people would name a child a name we can't pronounce? So I was put in the black half of the dorms. As my luck would have it, My roommate was the largest human being ever from the state of Georgia. Charlie Horse Johnson. He ended up playing with Cincinnati in the early 70s. And he opened that door, and he looked down at me, and he said, and excuse me, "Shit, I thought you'd be black." Well, there I sat in the hallway, staring at an enormously large person, thinking that 5 of my steps were one of his, so running was definitely not an option. Turning around, I would hit a wall. Weighing my options, I looked at him and I said, "It's worse than you think." I said, "I'm Cuban." I said, "We look like them, but we dance like you." My 2 most important lessons as a young man: if they're really big, become their friend. Self-survival. Number 2, in society, with all the diversity we have in this country, we need to look at what we have in common, not what we have different. By working together and bringing all the different cultures and richness, that's what improves our nation. If it wasn't for immigration, for God's sakes, we'd all be eating grilled cheese and listening to John Denver. But because of this, we get the great taste of foods, of musics, of literature. We enhance ourselves. And what happened when all of a sudden we became a nation of immigrants that just didn't like them? I still wonder if there were the Native Americans sitting there on Plymouth Rock watching the Mayflower come in, and one looked at the other and said, "Oh my goodness, boat people. They've come to our country." Remember, we're all from somewhere else. Some of our families came voluntarily. In the South, many of the families did not. And I live in the South, where we have the majority of poverty in this nation. We have poverty everywhere, but we have the majority of it there. And we need to question ourselves as professionals if we are doing the right role in doing what is best for our nation. That is a responsibility, students, that you will have on your shoulders. It's also the greatest opportunity you can have on your shoulders. What a chance in life to make a huge difference to improve a society. The social determinants of health, which include everything between socioeconomics, educational level, transportation, the elephant in the room, racism, police brutality, lack of transportation, xenophobia. All of these are real. Most of us don't feel it now. I mean, I grew up when I was 13 years old. I worked at Lionel Playworld, for those that you remember, Lionel Trains and Lionel Playworld, and I was stocking the toys there, and our manager was a redneck from Arkansas, and he called me and Guillermo Muenos, who I worked with. He was calling us guacamoles. Cubans have no idea what the hell guacamole is. We don't eat guacamole. And I got home and I asked my mother, I said, "Mom, what's guacamole? I'm 13 years old. She looks at me, continues with her work, and says, "Oh, that's an avocado dip." Talk about a dumbfounded young man. Why would I be an avocado dip? Of all things, could I be a hamburger? And she started to laugh when I explained to her why I asked, and she said, "Those are those that we need to educate." Not what a horrible thing it was, but how in a society, the greatest lesson she gave me was, remember what it's like to be prejudiced against, so you never, ever do it to somebody else. Because all of you, regardless of your background, that are going to be physicians, are going to be in a position of power. Whether it's a power over your patient, or a power over a department, or a power over an academic institution, or a hospital, or a clinic, or a surgical center, whatever it is, you're going to have power. Remember what that was like, so you never do that to anybody, ever. And just because we're minorities, don't worry, minorities have just as much bias and prejudice as non-minorities. We all share that, it's a human nature. So we have to constantly check ourselves for our biases. And the reason we need to do that is because the health of our patients, the quality of their life and their families depend upon that. It's not good enough to identify a disease and write a prescription. It's about making and improving the life of that person in their homes and everybody around them. I've had an interesting trajectory in my life. When I was in medical school, my little sister, who was about to turn 18, wanted to spend her birthday with me. She was at the University of Florida where I went. She never made it. She was killed in a car accident a little less than a week before her birthday. You want to be devastated? Be a young medical student that wants to save the world. Of an immigrant family, you're the only male and you're supposed to take care of your siblings, which happen to be 2 sisters. And the youngest one that got to enjoy my father as he made more money gets killed in a car accident. Well, you want anger? You want to question God's existence? That's the time to do it. And then, because I was 23 years old, there was no way my parents could handle that devastation, not for everything they had been through in their lives. And it became my responsibility to arrange a funeral for my little sister, to write the eulogy, and to make all the arrangements. On the limo on the way to the burial, I felt weight on my shoulders. I was 23 years old, and for the first time in my life, I felt I was no longer young. Responsibilities had fallen upon me. And God works in funny ways. First of all, when I got there were 2 busloads of elderly. I didn't know this, but my little sister used to volunteer with the elderly all the time. So I made a promise to God that if I ever got to be a physician, I never wanted to see anybody die or suffer alone. There's a problem when you make a promise to God. Where are you going to hide? Well, I found City Hall in Miami, because obviously with the decisions they've made, God has never visited. So there was my little recluse. But in continuing along with that, on my first rotation at Jackson Memorial Hospital, at the time the busiest public hospital in the United States, I was part of the 2nd largest internal medicine residency program. We took in 55 interns, or PGY1s now. We had about 140 to 150 residents. And in my 2nd rotation in the intensive care unit, we had a gentleman dying of pulmonary tuberculosis, miliary TB. That means metastatic. It has spread throughout his body. Intubated with all the machines going on. This was 1983, before the onslaught of HMOs, so we could actually treat the patient. Every single day I would see this patient. It had his name, his date of birth, which appeared to come from a much younger man, and it said no address. That meant that fire rescue had found him under the streets, under the bridges. So at that time, with the promise I had made, I decided to go look at shelters. Miami, not being known for its compassion, had only 2 homeless shelters at the time. Now this is 1983, folks. What's going on in 1983? We have a recession. We have the cocaine wars going on in Miami. We have crack. And we have a new thing called HIV. We got runaways, because if you're going to run away, where are you going to go? Where it's warm. Little did they know they were coming to Florida, where we had no services. And when you medical students think that something is hard to do, you want to know what hard is? Hard is being a Syrian refugee. Hard is being homeless on the streets of Scranton in the winter. That's hard. Everything else isn't that hard. We might feel it's hard, but get it done for the right reasons. I'd never found this man's family, and I outlived his life in my rotation through the unit. What I did see was a world of poverty that existed in my city that I never knew was there. So as an intern, I decided to start a clinic for the homeless. My brother-in-law, an Ivy League trained attorney, warned me about the liability issues. I was married, I had 2 kids. That meant I had a mother-in-law and I had loans. I was willing to give either one of the 2 up. As a matter of fact, I'd pay the loans. We've never been sued in that shelter or that clinic. We see over 15,000 patients a year. We opened a clinic then for undocumented aliens because they were not allowed in the public hospital unless it was acute emergency. We opened that up in a church. Why did we open it up in a church? Because people feel comfortable in a church. We decided to take the patient's perspective, not our perspective. We also realized that the poorer you are, the more complex your life becomes. The harder it is to get to point A to point B, the harder it is to make sure your family is supported. I remember sitting under the bridge when my wife was pregnant with my son, talking to a pregnant woman under the bridge on a mattress, and I have that photo sitting in my office, discussing the future of our children. I'm worried about where they're going to college. She's hoping it doesn't rain that night. She's hoping some crack addict doesn't come by and cause some problems where she's sleeping. We sued the federal government because they were harassing and beating up the homeless, and we won that lawsuit. It was a Pottinger case, the Pottinger versus the city of Miami. It was a landmark case. The federal judge asked me to come in and give my medical school lecture on homelessness and social determinants back in 1987. And that's what I did when we used to use slides. You had to put them in backwards and upside down for those of us that remember the little carousels. No PowerPoints back then. And it was a very interesting thing that the judge asked me to do. Because I don't know if you've been to federal court or testified in federal court, but they make you sit in a box outside until they call you in. It's not like you can hear and see what's going on. And we won that case. We won that case. I was also handing out condoms at the time in the clinic, a Catholic clinic, and I'm deeply Catholic. And I was reported to the bishop, which is like being called to the principal's office. My wife, Irish Catholic, of course, sat me down and said, "You refer to him as Your Excellency, and you need to pray that we're not going to get excommunicated." So I went to the bishop's house on a Saturday. And I like to do things with a little humor, and the bishop says, "Dr. Greer," and I said, "Yes, Your Excellency." He says, "I've been told you've been handing out condoms in a Catholic facility." I said, "Your Excellency, we put holes in them, we bless them." I want you to know that did not break the ice. Okay? But we got into a wonderful discussion of about 2 hours on the sanctity of life. And I explaining to the bishop that this was not procreation. This was sex for drugs, sex for money for drugs. It was prostitution. And somehow we had to protect the lives of those with this new virus that was out there. He called his aide over, whispered in his ear. A little while later, the aide came and whispered back in the bishop's ear. And Archbishop McCarthy looked at me and said, "Dr. Greer, I have been told that the city owns the sidewalk, not the church." And that was the end of our conversation. He called me a week later and asked if I would drive him. He was arranging a press conference under the bridge to show the plight with the other religious leaders of our community of the homeless. At the time, I used to drive a 1979 Jeep C7 without doors. And my wife says, "You're taking the bishop in that car?" I said, "It's the only car I got." So he came dressed as a bishop, and as we were on the highway, it was like a Bennington ad with the trucks honking their horns. But we got a tax passed so we could start a homeless trust. When we started the homeless clinic in Cuba, my dad's sister, my dad did not get a birth certificate until he was 10 years old, because that's when he went to school. He's the first one to finish high school in our family. His sister married a man by the name of Miguel Garcia el Gallego, who ended up becoming Lucky Luciano's bodyguard. So growing up in Miami, they quickly went to Vegas. I got to learn a lot about this type of life. And I remember I got in a fight when I was 14 years old and got beat up pretty badly. And I get home all bloodied up, and my uncle goes, "Okay, let's go get him." I'm going, "No, I don't think so." The first time didn't go very well. I quit. I just tried to help a friend at a party. And I learned something from the mafia. And this is the way I started the homeless clinic. What does the mafia like to do? They like to make money. They like to make a lot of money. So instead of making money, why don't we switch that over and say, let's make people's lives better? That's my currency. They like to do it in a way that's illegal. So how do they do it? They have an ice cream shop, and in the back room they have the gambling casino. What will a homeless sick patient do? He'll come and see a doctor. But what am I going to put in the back room? Social workers. Why am I going to put social workers there? Because I can diagnose all the diseases in the world if you're homeless. I can't treat you. Do you ever try and maintain a diabetic diet in a homeless individual? How long do you think a bag of syringes are going to last for the diabetic when they're under the bridge? What if they have coronary artery disease? What are you going to do? Give them nitrates? Nitroglycerin? Have you read the bottle? It says, keep out of heat or light. That means they'd have to move to Scranton. Okay? So everything I was taught was useless. I remember the very first patient I saw came in with the worst fungal infection of the feet. I don't know about you guys, but I didn't listen to any lecture from the ankle down. So I was sort of stuck, what do I do? Most of them are laborers. What do laborers need? Anti-inflammatory drugs, because they hurt. It says take with a meal. That means they got to wait for the church van to go by. From there, I was invited and I worked in the Bush Senior administration with Lou Sullivan. And never thinking I belonged in that area anyways, one of the things I realized about Washington was everybody takes themselves really seriously up here. Maybe they should take their job seriously and not themselves. And then we were in the HHS office in the room downstairs with the big circular table, which reminds me of the Paris Peace Talks that took a year to design which type of table to have before we could have peace talks. And Lou Sullivan was the first one. Now remember, 1985 was the very first time that there was a report in this country about disparities in health. And it wasn't until 1986 that we even started an Office of Minority Health. So you guys, it's only been 30 years since we started looking at this issue. Something that has been in the literature of medicine from day one. You could read Chinese literature and it'll tell you, you could tell the diagnosis of a patient purely by the way they appear and they're dressed. When did we lose this aspect of observation? This aspect of humanity? This aspect of understanding other people, not just understanding a disease or the pathophysiology? When did we start losing that? And so with working with Lou Sullivan, I remember he was the first one that suggested we needed to diversify our medical school classes. We needed more minorities, he said, to work in minority areas. And why is that? Because minorities tend to go back and work in minority areas. Rich white kids tend to go back and work in the area they're from, where people feel comfortable. But I believe a doctor should treat everybody without prejudice. We've created a system that makes us immediately biased. I don't take your insurance, I don't take you because you have no insurance. Or you can't be in this system, you have to be in that system. We've created a system that is based on margins and profit and not on the better outcome of a nation and its health. And we need to question that, and we need to fight that. And when things, as students in particular, when you see, because students are very powerful. The American Medical Student Association became independent from the AMA in 1964 because the AMA was against Medicare and Medicaid. And students thought, you're wrong. And you were right. Students were the one that came to academic medicine and said, why are you taking so much drug money to do research? And we can explain it, could we? But you were right to fight it and make medical schools sign papers saying they wouldn't do that. So yes, you're a very powerful group. You're a very altruistic group. You see things through very clean eyes. Keep looking at them that way. It's about human beings. It's about people that are no different than ourselves. The only difference is we have become an elite part of society, both with our education and with our money. That means we have an incredible responsibility to give opportunities to those that don't have. And that opportunity is not doing the surgery. The opportunity is seeing what we could help. So when the opportunities came up of the new millennial schools, it was very interesting because at FIU, what we ended up doing was we said, we have a clean slate. We're in Miami, nobody knows we're here. We're at the second largest university in the state of Florida, nobody even knows we exist because our football team doesn't win. We're not Central Florida, we're not University of Florida, and we're not Florida State. We're the FIU Panthers. You've never heard of us. We did play in the Beef O'Brady Bowl. If you've ever heard of Beef O'Brady, I have not. And we played in Tampa against Marshall, and it was such a small little bowl that the CEO of the company sang the national anthem. I was there with my son, and I said, I can't wait till halftime because I heard they had a really good DJ. But there was an advantage of not having a winning football team. We could concentrate on other things. And it's easy to recruit faculty when you can guarantee them season tickets to afford a public university football. But what we're able to do is say, what are the competencies we need for the 21st century? The same thing you are doing here. What are the things we are not teaching? And the dean and I have talked about things as important as our undergraduate requirements to become a doctor. I asked the students there, you guys, After 2 years of chemistry, how much have you used? Okay. Really, believe me, when you graduate, remember Krebs is spelled with a K, okay, and cycle with a C. Unless you're going to be a basic science researcher or go into certain other aspects of research, you really don't need that chemistry. And why do we teach you organic chemistry? To weed you out? Really? That's what we're going to use to weed you out? Empathy, humanism, the understanding, the ability to have critical thinking. Well, we don't do that in pre-med. We teach you to memorize. We also tell you compete like hell to get into medical school. And what's the first thing we say when you get to medical school? The first week we're going to teach you interprofessional teamwork. After 4 years of beating each other up to get into med school, we want you just to forget all of that now. Unless you want to be an orthopedic surgeon. Because you're going to have to compete really hard because it's so lucrative, everybody wants to do it. We used to say that you had to be big, dumb, and smart to be an orthopedic surgeon, but now we know we have power tools. I'm trying to figure out why the top of the class has to be so smart to go into dermatology. If it's wet, dry it. If it's dry, wet it. If it doesn't resolve, put steroids on it. If that doesn't work, biopsy it. Oh, I'll tell you why, because we have spas. And the spas make an incredible amount of money. You should come to Miami. We have medical spas. You paid 2/3 of their education, and they're improving the way people look, period. It was nice when Forbes magazine came out and said Miami had the best looking people in the country, followed by a comma, and the dumbest. There's no pride in that whatsoever. There's pride in a community like Scranton, where intellectualism, where compassion, where the real thought of the future plays a huge role. Don't forget the power you have to make change. Your lives are going to be good, students. I can guarantee you that. There are no poor doctors. There's some doctors that are poorer than others. Just don't compare yourself to neurosurgeons. Nobody can do that. But you will live well. But you will live good because you will do good. You will help the lives of others. When we decided to influence with the social determinants of health, we teach it from the very beginning, but the very first class we give our medical students are the ethical foundations of medicine. Why is that? For 2 reasons. I live in Miami and nobody can spell ethics. We're the Medicare fraud capital of the United States. We have twice as much Medicare fraud in the Dade County, Miami-Dade County, than we do in the entire United States of America. 36th in the world, 39th in the world, twice as much Medicare fraud in Miami as the rest of the country. Miami's a fun party town, but within that party town lives an incredible amount of poverty. We are the second poorest city in the United States of America, with the second or third in disparities in income. 1/5 of Miamians, 1/5, that's 520,000 people, live under the poverty line. That means a family of 4 that makes less than $23,500 a year. 45% of my county lives under an income of $40,000 a year for a family of 4. I want anybody here to think what it must be like to have a family of 4 living on something like that. In a city that has no social infrastructure, that does have no transportation. So when we started our medical school, we said we're going to do something different, just like here. Our main mission is going to be to educate and prepare physicians. Because what else has happened in medical education? We have the great centers of research and the great centers of clinical practice. And education has fallen by the wayside because of the way we pay our faculty. Your faculty is dependent on your incentives and your revenue from your clinical or from your research. A lot of times researchers love research, they hate to teach. Clinicians love clinicians, they love to teach, but when their income becomes dependent on it, it takes time away from teaching and it increases the pressure and you have unhappy teachers. And we've heard that from students. Why don't more people go into primary care? Everybody says it's because of money. It's not because of money. It's because of the hidden curriculum. It's because why do you want to go into a profession, or especially with the doc you're rotating with is unhappy? It's a mentorship program. that can show you do that. So what we decided to do is I hired all our faculty as educators, not as clinicians. We don't have a clinical practice. We gave our primary care, and in the Department of Humanities, Health and Society, in the Division of Family Medicine, we had psychiatry, family medicine, med peds, HIV specialists, geriatricians, adolescent pediatricians. Why? Because those were the pressing problems, and they all were mission-oriented. We decided to start interdisciplinary teams, but our interdisciplinary teams consisted not of nurses and OT and PT and pharmacology. Because we said we have to go beyond the patient care model, the patient-centered care model. Why is that? Because it's an antiquated model. We still expect you to come to us. And before World War II, the majority of doctors' visits were home visits. And there's nothing you can't do in primary care with a good physical exam and a good history you can't do in a person's home that you can't do in your primary care office. So what did our team consist of? Well, my first hire was a Hispanic female. My second hire was an African-American male. So as not to be accused of no diversity, I had to find a white Jewish guy from New York just to fill the circle. And I got Dave Brown, who's spectacular. What was the first thing we did? Well, academic centers in urban settings are not well received in poor neighborhoods. Because what do? We're grant driven. We go in, when the grant's over, we leave. We do research and we publish. We rarely share it. Now we're getting into more of, and we're not quite there yet, community participatory research. It really has to be led cohesively by an academic institution in the community. As Lou, who developed our outreach program, told me, Joe, the problem with you doctors is you go into communities, you knock on doors, you say, what do people need? They say, I need a job. I have a foreclosure issue. I have behavioral issues at home. There's drug issues. I'm in a crime-ridden community. And what do we say? Don't worry, we'll build you a clinic. As we explain to our students every single day, the poorest in our community, which is 40%, have one job, and that's to climb a mountain. And when they climb that mountain, they have a backpack, and that backpack weighs 5,000 pounds. That's their daily job. Getting up, taking 3 buses to work, making sure the kids are fed, making sure the kids stay in school, making sure they make it to school safely. I remember one time, from the homeless shelter that we had started, taking a kid, a couple of families. One was an African-American grandmother with her grandkids. The other one was a Mexican-American from the Salvation Army. I drove through Overtown to take them home. This was in the mid-1980s. And as I'm driving into the apartment building where the black lady and her kids lived, some guy knocks on my window and asks if I want to buy crack. I have 5 children, 2 adult women and myself, and somebody's trying to sell me crack. Can you imagine that on a daily basis when you go home? Can you imagine how that grandmother felt and the reason why she walked into school every single day? And then we make these archaic laws like mandatory sentencing for drugs. And then we tack things on them like, say, if you buy or sell drugs within a certain distance of a church or a school, you double your sentence. Well, why do you think our jails are filled with African Americans? Statistics clearly show that African Americans are the least to use drugs in this country. We white folks took that by leaps and bounds, followed by my other half, the Hispanics. We'd like to be on top. Then Asians, and then African Americans. Because when you get busted buying or selling drugs in a poor neighborhood, let me tell you what poor neighborhoods have in the South. They got a church on every corner. Guess what happens to your sentence? It gets doubled. If my kids got busted with pot, come on, seriously, what's going to happen? Slap on the wrist, go to a rehab, expunge the record. Same kid in Little Haiti or Overtown, Miami Gardens, Opelika. What happens to them? They get a federal crime. Their life is shut down. They can't even become a barber or a hairstylist because they have a felony. Is that a just society? It all comes to our door. We're the physicians. They show up at the emergency room. The social determinants of health are the same causes of Ferguson and Baltimore. In the recent federal report of Ferguson, and this came out the same day we were presenting to the Institute of Medicine on the social determinants of health, It showed that the black suburban neighborhood in St. Louis versus the white suburban neighborhood in St. Louis had greater than a 3-decade difference in survival. More than 30-year difference in survival. That's greater than the United States of America and Haiti. That's acceptable? That's something to be proud of? As a first generation in this country, let me tell you, there is no greater country than the United States. And there is no greater country because what other country sits there and says, if there's a problem, we'll resolve it? Let's get together and make this work. And that's what you're doing here in Scranton. That's what we're trying to do in Miami. You got all of the good stuff, we get the weather. But you have to spend so much money on sunscreen down there, it's not worth it. That's where you, as young medical students and physicians, need to take in and understand the liberal arts, the histories. You're not going to become culturally competent. You have to become culturally humble. You have to understand other lives and other systems that come in. My wife's adopted, her family's from Hazleton, and they're Eastern European. That's a very different food than Cuban food. I was not used to having bread with potato in the middle, okay? It looked good. I still can barely pronounce pierogies, okay? But it's another culture. It's a culture to absorb, to listen to learn from. Because that same culture brought us spectacular artists, musicians, writers, all these things that are so important to learn. We need to understand those. Because to become a physician nowadays, it's not about the science. And unless you were a researcher, it really was never just about the science. It's about the patient you're taking care of. And we went beyond patient-centered care and we do household-centered care. And why do we do household-centered care? Because we believe that the household becomes the most important entity in either causing disease or prevention and or treatment of disease in the very, very poor. It happens in the very rich too. Things happen behind closed doors that people don't talk about. There are stresses. There are issues there that we're not even aware of. And so our interdisciplinary teams consist of our students, law students, School of Education students. Why is that? Because the households asked us that they wanted tutoring. Our medical students were dying to tutor. We said, that's great. Let me explain something to you. You got rotations. You play your part on the team and the other person plays their part. We have PA students now, we have social work students, we have public health students when we can get them out of the office. They like to do a lot of surveys. And we sit there and then we have interdisciplinary rounds. Before we go into the household, we go in with an attending and we huddle. You make a plan when you go in and then we huddle when we come out. Now, the parents of the students say, you know, you're in the toughest neighborhoods in Miami with the highest crime rates. What do you do? But we actually have an outreach teams that form the link between the families, the community partners that refer the families to us, because the families that are referred to us are the ones that are so sick or so unable to, they can't show up at a clinic. The teacher calls us and tells us Johnny hasn't been here in 2 weeks. Well, that's because Johnny's grandmother's demented and they can't afford to care for the mother. And you know how much it costs on average to care for a patient with dementia? $91,000 a year. Do you really think somebody making $23,000 or $40,000 a year can afford that? I don't think so. Actually, dementia in America right now costs more than cardiovascular and cancer care put together. And these costs will continue to increase. Do you know the stressors that come with taking care of a demented patient or a chronically ill patient? So these students, these households are referred to us. The outreach team goes and evaluates the household. We evaluate it for safety. If somebody there has a legal handgun, we send in our safety officers from the university, and we teach the entire family on gun safety, and our department pays for the gun lock. Now, I live in the state of Florida. We have a law called Doc versus Glock. It is now illegal in my state for a pediatrician or any other physician to ask if there's a handgun in the house. Because God forbid we should think handguns are causing some sort of death or injury. And going back to Ferguson and going back to Baltimore, let's look at the responsibilities that academic institutions have and we have not fulfilled. We thought our social responsibility to our country was discovering the greatest drug to treat a disease. I believe seriously that academic institutions in medicine have an inherent responsibility to improve the health care of a community. Not by the delivery of care, but by working in the community and working with community partners and doing it all together. I would love to see a methodology that measures the outcomes of a medical school in its communities and use that for NIH funding. Let me tell you how quickly you would turn that vending machine around. In Baltimore, there's a couple of pretty good medical institutions there. There's a place called Maryland, another one called Hopkins. Apparently they forgot about their neighborhoods. St. Louis has SLU and Washington. Pretty damn good schools. What's happened in their communities when there's a greater than 3-decade difference in survival between two neighborhoods within the same close geographic area? What have we not gotten? What has not slapped us in the face to turn around and say, we need to do something? And you should be really proud of this institution here. The leadership I have met, the mission that they are going on and what they are doing, I'm envious of. And I thought we were doing cool stuff. Just don't get a football team, because at least that way we'll have a better record than you, even if we just win one game. This institution needs support. My kids also went to Jesuit colleges. The Jesuits teach us social justice. And social justice, not as Fox says, is not a communist term. It's an old Catholic religious term. And it translates even into greater things, because all faiths basically follow the same. It is our inherent responsibility to have justice in a community. Equity is not justice. Justice goes much further than equity. If you had a person that was 2 feet tall, one that was 5 feet tall, and one that was 7 feet tall, and they wanted to see a baseball game, equity means they all get a 1-foot box. Justice means the 2-foot one gets a 7-foot box that can stand on and look over the fence, and so on and so on. Different people have different things that they need. And I'm going to end now as a Cuban. I didn't even drink water, and then you'd never shut me up. But students, I wrote a book. I'm a narrative writer. When you come from islands, you tell stories. That's what we do. We tell stories. And as you go out in the world and you want to make change, you need to learn to tell a story. You need to tell a story that will capture somebody's heart, or the change will not come. Dry statistics aren't going to make it. Given the statistics, and the number of the poor aren't going to make it, because the poor have faces, the poor have hearts, the poor have souls. Tell their stories. Tell the good stories and tell the bad stories, but tell and learn how to tell a story. And how do you learn how to tell a story? You read literature. And you see how other people have done it. That's how you learn how to tell a story. And the more you read, the better physician you'll become. Don't worry about the science. We're going to cram that down your throat. And we're going to test the hell out of you on it anyways. You're going to learn that. But that doesn't make you a good doc. That makes you somebody that understands the science. Our role as physicians far exceeds science. It's about humans. It's about families. It's about society. It's about communities. And if the same causes of Ferguson and Baltimore are the same causes of the disease that come into our emergency rooms, why, as we a profession, not taking the lead in turning this country around and making that understood? Well, we can. And what a great opportunity now to do it. But something that can never be taken away from us that very few other professions have is your interactions with individuals. The stories you hear, the yarns that are told to you from those that have so little. I used to tell students, take a little note packet and write it down. Now you can do it on your iPhone. You can just write there in notes or whatever. Remember those stories. Take a piece of paper and write down why you wanted to become a physician. Not in the middle of tests, but why in your heart you wanted to become a physician. And every time you're frustrated, pull out that piece of paper and read it. so you could put your feet back on the ground and realize that, yeah, I got through organic chemistry. I can get through this too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a couple stories from a book I wrote about 16 years ago to show you what I mean by the greatest lessons I have ever learned were not from my Nobel Prize laureate professors, not from my experience in Washington. And after the Bush administration, I worked in the transition team and then in the Clinton health reform. I'll tell you a funny story. The very first time we met Clinton, we were going to the Oval Office. And at the time, I was an associate dean at the University of Miami, and we had deans there from Hopkins, from Harvard, and from Penn. Now, you could always tell Hopkins faculty because they congratulate each other. The Harvard faculty would introduce themselves as God, not the God, but one of the many gods from the Boston area. I introduced myself as, hi, I'm Pedro Greer, Associate Dean at the University of Miami School of Medicine. I'm one of 4 Cuban Democrats. We meet in a phone booth on 8th Street. And nobody laughed. I thought that was really one of my best lines. At the time, and this was in the 1990s, it was before 9/11. So we used to work in the old executive office building. We had a white tag with a black A on it, which meant you needed an escort into the White House. So I held up my badge and I said, and we don't need no stinking badges. We got into Watergate without these. There I got a smile. But it became, even during the Clinton administration, when the president would say, it's about the economy, stupid. Well, it's not just about the economy, it's about people. If you want to get interested in policy work, you need to ask the correct question. The question was not about the cost of medicine. The question was about the health of a nation. The healthier a nation, you automatically reduce the cost. So it's not about the cost. The cost is a consequence of doing what is right. The diversity of a medical school class is not the answer. That's one of the tools to improve the health of America, one of the many tools that we have to get to. Because if we don't have people that understand different cultures and we don't have classes that can interchange their experiences, you're never going to become the great physician that you should be. And it was a Tuesday night at the clinic when a young woman in a tattered red dress came in. She was about 25 years old. She seemed a lot older. The lines of her battle-weary face barely concealed beneath a smudge of stale makeup. Her soiled clothes a swath of spandex. Those told the story of her hard life on the streets. Her eyes revealed her turmoil. Whatever her story, at the very least, she deserved a bath and a rest. That night, I was working with 3rd and 4th year medical students, and I sent Carlos into room 3 where she was sitting there crying. Within minutes, he came rushing out of the exam room. Dr. Greer said, I can't get a history out of her. I don't know what to do. What's the problem, Carlos? I said. I don't know. She's crying like a baby. I can't get her to talk to me. I said, do you think it's physical? Do you think it's emotional? Do you think it's drugs? He says, I don't know. He opens up the chart as we're walking towards the room. He said she's been here once before, some derm problem. No history of psych problems noted. He goes, puts a little smile on and says, oh, she does smoke crack. Must be the perks of prostitution. We walked into an exam room and found a desperate woman. She was trembling. I extended my hand to greet her. We do very special things in medicine. We touch other human beings. Something that has to be sacred when you do that. Now, different cultures are different. I'm Cuban. We kiss everybody. I quickly learned at the University of Florida that in north central Florida, that was not a custom of crackers. As I met a young lady for the first time in a bar, and I went to kiss her on the cheek, I can still remember the whistling of her hand as it came across my face. I said, oh, they don't kiss here. They shake hands. In my culture, you kiss your father, you kiss your son, you kiss your cousins, you kiss everybody. You meet somebody, you kiss them. That's just how you do it. That's how we say hello. I was not very culturally humble, but I became humbled very quickly. People tell us things that they want nobody else to know. The confidence you must maintain as a physician with your patient. We make decisions on their life that has to be based on what's going to improve their life. And that's not what's going to be economically better for us. A person's life depends upon it. Where you might think $100 is nothing, that might be somebody's 2-day salary. You have to think of the whole system. Oh, I'm just ripping off the insurance companies. Somebody's paying the insurance companies. Money runs out eventually. We can control those levers, and they don't have to go into our pockets. "We're here to help you," I said. "Do you hurt anywhere?" I asked, gently nudging her elbow to give her a sense of stability. She was full of tears, gasping for air. "It hurts down here," she said between sobs, holding her lower abdomen and doubling over. "It feels like it's burning. It won't stop. Please help me, please." The nurse and I let her calm down before we examined her. Do me a favor, you guys. When you're on the wards or you're in a clinic and you're going to examine a patient, please only put one stethoscope on at a time. These are human beings. Treat every single patient with the respect you expect to be treated as, the respect you expect your parents to be treated as, your grandparents. That's what we have to do. And don't be flippant about a diagnosis or a differential diagnosis. Do you really think a patient can tell the difference between a student and a faculty member? Do you really think they know the difference between the coats? So when we're asked for a differential diagnosis, please do it outside the reach of the patient. Because in a differential diagnosis, there's a good chance cancer comes up. And once you mention that word, let me tell you what the patient does. They shut off completely, because that's their fear. Make sure you have your facts right before you give information to your patient. Regardless how poor you think your patient is, you have to offer them everything we can offer in this country. And if they can't afford it, if you're smart enough to get into medical school, hell, you could beat the system and get them what they need to have. In the meantime, you're going to get tired of it and you're going to change the system so you don't have to do that anymore. But in the meantime, you have somebody right there you need to take care of. I grew up in Catholic school. I grew up asking for forgiveness, not permission. It seems to work sometimes. "It hurts down here," she said between sobs, holding her lower abdomen and doubling over. "It feels like it's burning. It won't stop. Please help me, please," she said. I palpated her tender belly, completed my physical exam. We concluded that her symptoms in the exam suggested a mix of pelvic inflammatory disease and other sexually transmitted diseases. "It'll be okay," I told her, trying to offer a little reassurance. Slowly, she began to tell us why she had really come to the clinic when she could have gone to the gynecologist at the public health unit. Looking down at the floor, she said, "I was raped. Raped hard last night," as she doubled over again in tears and in shame. "Why didn't you go to the rape treatment center?" I asked. After all, it was at Jackson Memorial Hospital, one of the great centers in the country. "Doctor," she said with a look that suggested I should know the answer to my own question, "look at me. Look at how I'm dressed." I couldn't take the comments people would make. She paused and then broke into tears. She was right. The mammoth system of healthcare we have offers excellent care and all of the best technology. But buildings and institutions, they don't offer solace. They don't offer protection from prejudice. They don't offer empathy. That's because a building, as beautiful as it is, there's one thing a contractor can't do, and that's build a soul into a building. That's where you come in. That's where we know that if you treat people right, if you listen, if you have the empathy, if you understand, they'll feel comfortable coming to you. They'll feel comfortable to seek your help. What possible lessons can we learn from a homeless hooker? Or as they used to be referred to in the day, a crack whore? Plenty. Ask the right questions, and you'll seek the right answers. She taught me more than any of my professors ever taught me. She taught me to reflect, to look back into saying, what is wrong with the system? And now I'm going to end up here with a story I told the students last night. One afternoon around lunchtime, I walked into the clinic with a sandwich. I greeted the patients in the waiting room and walked over to the pediatric area, where I found a mother with 3 of her children. They told me they had come from the Salvation Army. The youngest child, about 6 years old, had sweet eyes. He captured my attention. This was lunchtime. I walked in with a sandwich. I'm Catholic. I feel guilty. I'm a non-purging bulimic. You'll get that later. I offered the child my sandwich. He took the sandwich out of the bag, took it out of the wrapper, broke it in half, and took 2 bites. Then he put it back in the bag with the wrapper and stuck it in his coat. I've worked in 2 administrations. I've been around the heads of states. I get to do stuff that is really, really cool. And here's a homeless child. A homeless child knows that when they're going to a homeless clinic, as proud as we are of the clinic, everybody in our society knows, oh, that's where the really poor people go. I think the biggest mistake I have made in my career was writing papers using the word homeless. I labeled people. I labeled people. That's a bad thing to do. It's a description, but it's a bad thing to do. And you know what? Do you ever wonder what it's like to be a homeless kid? When they say, draw your house, what are you going to draw? A shelter, a car? And what do they get to wear? Whatever we don't like, because that's what we donate. And one Christmas, we asked the kids what they wanted, and they said socks and underwear. Wasn't it Socrates who taught us to question authority? Or assumptions, excuse me? Because we assume everybody has socks and underwear. And by the way, if you're going to donate them, make those new, especially the underwear. And I looked at that little boy and I said, why'd you do that? And his reply stunned me. It's for my brothers, he said as he smiled. For God's sakes, he was hungry, but he knew how hungry they were. God has allowed me to study medicine, to explore the depths of its disease and its treatment. He's given me the most brilliant professors and inspiring mentors. He's opened the tombs of healing and placed in my hands the most incredibly technical aspects and instruments of care. But on any random afternoon, God has offered me the most remarkable postgraduate courses. He's allowed me to find them in the gentle lull in the city of Miami under a bridge in an emergency room, in the waiting room of a neighborhood clinic, in the wisdom and humanity of a homeless child. The goodness of that child has stayed with me throughout the years. And every morning I pray to God that I can be that 6-year-old child, that I can go through my day without judging somebody, without even knowing what happened with them the day before, the night before, the week before. That my job is to be empathetic, is to listen, is to gather the information and improve their lives. Why do I think social determinants of health are so important? Because they affect the lives of so many that are so vulnerable. And why do I think we need to do it? Because I think we, as a physician class, need to save this damn world. We need to set that bar as high as possible, because people's lives depend on it. And if I can leave you all with one message, try to be that child. That's all. It's that simple. Thank you.
There will be a reception now outside in the lobby, and you will all have the opportunity to interact with Dr. Greer. I think we've gone a little over time. Sandra, do you think we have time for questions here?
If there are questions, a couple of them.
I can't imagine there aren't.
Especially if the students have.
And by the way, I have never been convicted.
That's the truth.
That's the truth. I didn't mention arrested, I just said.
Well, we'll see you all out in the lobby.
We'll see you out there. Thank you all very much.
Yeah,